Summer of 1971. The conference room on the third floor of Warner Brothers Studios smelled of cigarette smoke, cold coffee, and desperation. 6 executives sat around a mahogany table littered with scripts, budget reports, and overflowing ashtrays. The blinds were drawn against the California sun, casting the room in a dim, anxious light. Nobody was smiling. Nobody had smiled in weeks. At the center of the table sat a screenplay with a simple title, Dirty Harry, 102 pages that would either save careers or end them. The script had been floating around Hollywood for nearly 3 years, passed from studio to studio like a cursed artifact that nobody wanted to touch. It was violent. It was controversial. It asked uncomfortable questions about justice, law, and what a man was willing to do to protect the innocent. And right now, at this very moment, it had no star. The producer, Robert Daly, rubbed his temples and stared at the list of names in front of him. Each one had a line through it. Frank Sinatra, crossed out. Steve McQueen, crossed out. Paul Newman, crossed out. John Wayne, crossed out. Robert Mitchum, George C. Scott, Burt Lancaster, all crossed out. Every major leading man in Hollywood had read this script, and every single one of them had said the same word, no. "We're out of options," someone muttered. The silence that followed was suffocating. And then, almost as an afterthought, someone spoke a name that made half the room laugh. A name that seemed absurd, desperate, a Hail Mary from a team that had already lost the game. What about Clint Eastwood? The laughter died quickly, because in that moment, in that smoke-filled room where careers hung by a thread, something shifted, something that would change cinema forever. If you want to discover how Hollywood's biggest stars all rejected the role that would become iconic, why Frank Sinatra was devastated when he lost it, and how Clint Eastwood turned everyone's rejection into the performance of a lifetime, stay until the end of this story. What happened next didn't just make a movie, it created a legend. The story of Dirty Harry began not in Hollywood, but in the streets of San Francisco, where a real monster was hunting. The Zodiac Killer had terrorized the Bay Area for years, taunting police, sending cryptic letters to newspapers, killing with seeming impunity. The case was never solved. The killer was never caught. And a screenwriter named Harry Julian Fink became obsessed with a single question. What if there was a cop willing to cross every line to stop someone like that? The character he created was Harry Callahan, a San Francisco police inspector who didn't play by the rules, who carried a .44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and wasn't afraid to use it, who looked at the bureaucracy and politics of modern law enforcement and decided that justice mattered more than procedure. He was brutal. He was uncompromising. He was, in the language of the time, dirty, and Hollywood was terrified of him. The script landed first at Universal, where executives read it and immediately passed. Too violent, too controversial, too likely to spark protests. It moved to Columbia, then to Paramount, then to half a dozen smaller studios. Everyone had the same reaction. This film would be a lightning rod. This film would attract boycotts, angry editorials, maybe even congressional hearings. In an era when Hollywood was still reeling from the cultural upheaval of the 1960s, nobody wanted to release a movie that seemed to celebrate a cop who shot first and asked questions never. But Robert Daly believed. He saw something in those pages that the others had missed. Not just violence, but a kind of primal honesty. Harry Callahan wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He was a response to a world that had grown too complicated, too bureaucratic, too willing to let monsters walk free on technicalities. Love him or hate him, he was real. And real, Daly knew, was what audiences craved. Warner Brothers finally agreed to make the film, but they had one condition. They needed a star, a big star. Someone whose name alone could sell tickets and provide cover if the controversy got too hot. They needed Frank Sinatra. Sinatra was perfect for the role. At 55 years old, he had reinvented himself as a tough guy actor, playing hard-bitten detectives and world-weary soldiers. He had the intensity, the danger, the coiled violence that Harry Callahan required. When he read the script, he didn't just like it, he loved it. He called Daly personally to express his enthusiasm. He started researching the Zodiac case. He even began practicing with a .44 Magnum at a private shooting range. Frank Sinatra was going to be Dirty Harry. The production was moving forward. And then fate intervened in the cruelest possible way. Sinatra had injured his hand during a previous film, a condition called Dupuytren's contracture that caused his fingers to curl inward. For most roles, it wouldn't have mattered. But Harry Callahan's entire mystique centered on that massive revolver, on the way he held it, aimed it, fired it with cold precision. Sinatra couldn't grip the gun properly. The doctors were clear. Surgery might help, but not in time for the production schedule. With genuine anguish, Sinatra withdrew from the project. The search began again, and this time, Warner Brothers aimed even higher. Steve McQueen was the biggest action star on the planet. The king of cool bullet had proven he could carry a cop movie with style and grit. When the script arrived at his home, expectations were enormous. McQueen read it over a weekend, called his agent, and delivered his verdict to violent. This character has no redemption. I don't want to play a fascist with a badge. The rejection stung, but there were other options. Paul Newman was riding high on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, a certified A-list star with impeccable credentials. Surely Newman would see the potential. He read the script in a single sitting and then wrote a detailed letter explaining why he could never make this film. "The politics are troubling," he wrote. "In this climate, with everything happening in the country, I can't be part of something that seems to celebrate police brutality. I wish you the best with the project." John Wayne seemed like a natural fit. The Duke had built his entire legend on playing tough, uncompromising men who stood for American values. Harry Callahan was exactly that, wasn't he? Wayne read 30 pages before throwing the script across the room. "This isn't a hero," he reportedly said. "This is a psychopath with a badge. Harry Callahan spits on everything a real lawman should stand for. Count me out." Robert Mitchum said no without even finishing the first act. George C. Scott's agent didn't bother returning calls. Burt Lancaster called it morally reprehensible. One by one, every major star in Hollywood looked at Dirty Harry and saw only risk, controversy. Career suicide, the executives at Warner Brothers were running out of names. The budget was shrinking. The release date was slipping. There was serious talk of shelving the project entirely, of cutting their losses and moving on to safer fare. The script that Robert Daly had championed for years was about to become another Hollywood footnote. Another almost was gathering dust in a filing cabinet. That's when someone mentioned Clint Eastwood. The reaction in the room was telling. Eastwood wasn't an ally. Not really. He had made his name in Italian westerns, spaghetti westerns. The industry called them with a sneer, playing a nameless gunslinger who killed for money and spoke in grunts. He had transitioned to American films, but nothing that suggested he could carry a major studio production. He was 41 years old, too old to be an action star by conventional wisdom. He had no Oscar nominations, no critical respect, no industry clout, but he had something else. He had that face, those eyes, the squint that seemed to see right through you. And he had a quality that was hard to define but impossible to ignore. A stillness, a coiled intensity, a sense that violence was always just a heartbeat away. Maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what Harry Callahan needed. The script was sent to Eastwood's production company with little fanfare. Nobody expected him to say yes. This was a courtesy, a formality, the last name on a very long list of rejections. His agent called back within 48 hours. Clint Eastwood wanted to meet. The meeting took place at a small restaurant in Carmel, far from the Hollywood circus. Eastwood arrived alone, ordered a beer, and listened as Daly made his pitch. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just sat there with that famous stillness, absorbing every word. When Daly finished, there was a long silence. Then Eastwood spoke, and his words surprised everyone. "I've read the script 3 times, he said quietly. "Everyone who passed on this is wrong. Harry Callahan isn't a fascist. He isn't a psychopath. He's a man who has looked into the abyss and decided that someone has to stand between the darkness and the innocent, even if it costs him his soul." He took a sip of his beer. "That's not a villain. That's a tragedy. And I know exactly how to play it." He had one condition. Don Siegel had to direct. Siegel was a veteran filmmaker who had worked with Eastwood before, a known sense craftsman who understood how to shoot action without losing character. Warner Brothers agreed immediately. They would have agreed to almost anything at that point. Production began in San Francisco in the spring of 1971. From the very first day, it was clear that something special was happening. Eastwood didn't just play Harry Callahan, he became him. He moved differently, spoke differently. There was an economy to his performance, a minimalism that stood in stark contrast to the theatrical styles of the era. While other actors emoted and projected, Eastwood withdrew. He made you lean in, made you watch, made you feel the violence simmering beneath that ice-cold surface. The famous scenes emerged organically. The "Do you feel lucky?" punk monologue was written as a straightforward threat. In Eastwood's hands, it became something else, almost philosophical, a meditation on chance and fate and the thin line between life and death. He delivered it so quietly that the sound technicians had to adjust their equipment. But in the dailies, watching that scene play back, everyone knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Don Siegel later recalled the moment he knew they had lightning in a bottle. It was a simple scene, Harry walking down a San Francisco street. Nothing happening, just movement and atmosphere. But the way Eastwood carried himself, the way his eyes scanned for threats, the way his hand never strayed far from his weapon, it was hypnotic. "I've worked with a lot of actors," Siegel said. "Clint isn't acting. He's existing. There's no separation between him and the character. It's almost frightening." The film wrapped on schedule and under budget, an Eastwood trademark that would define his career. Warner Brothers, still nervous about the controversy, scheduled a limited release in December 1971, hoping to qualify for awards while minimizing exposure. They needn't have worried, Dirty Harry exploded. Audiences lined up around the block, drawn by word of mouth that spread like wildfire. The film made back its budget in the first week. By the end of its run, it had grossed over $36 million, an enormous sum for the time. More importantly, it had struck a nerve. Harry Callahan became a cultural phenomenon, a symbol for audiences who felt that the system was broken, that the bad guys were winning, that someone needed to stand up and say, enough. The critics were divided, which only added to the film's mystique. Some called it dangerous, a celebration of vigilantism that would inspire violence. Others recognized its complexity, its willingness to ask hard questions about justice and its costs. Roger Ebert, in a review that would prove prophetic, wrote, "Dirty Harry is not a simple film, despite what its detractors claim. It is a howl of frustration from a society that has lost faith in its institutions, and Eastwood, with his cold eyes and utter stillness, embodies that frustration perfectly." For sequels followed. "Go ahead, Make My Day" entered the lexicon, quoted by everyone from presidents to pop stars. The character of Harry Callahan influenced generations of action heroes, from Die Hard's John McClane to countless others who followed the template Eastwood had created. And Clint Eastwood himself was transformed. No longer the spaghetti western guy, no longer the actor who couldn't get respect. He was a bona fide movie star, a cultural icon, a man who would bet on himself when nobody else would, and won. As for the actors who passed, Frank Sinatra never stopped talking about the role that got away. In interviews throughout the 1970s, he would bring up Dirty Harry unprompted, always with a note of wistful regret. "That should have been my picture. I knew it when I read it. I still know it now." Steve McQueen saw the film at a private screening and reportedly sat in silence for 10 minutes afterward, processing what he had just witnessed. When someone asked his opinion, he said only, "I was wrong." Paul Newman, ever gracious, sent Eastwood a handwritten note of congratulations. John Wayne never commented publicly, but those who knew him said the success of Dirty Harry bothered him deeply, a reminder that the new Hollywood was leaving him behind. The lesson of Dirty Harry is not simply about success, it is about vision. Every actor who rejected that role saw the same words on the same pages, but they saw only risk, only controversy, only reasons to say no. Clint Eastwood saw something different. He saw a character that spoke to the moment, a story that needed to be told, an opportunity hiding inside what everyone else considered poison. "You have to trust your instincts," Eastwood said years later, reflecting on the decision that changed his life. "Everyone told me that role was career suicide. They had their reasons, and they weren't stupid. But I read that script, and I felt something. I felt Harry Callahan, and when you feel something that strongly, you have to follow it, even if you're the only one." That is the secret of Clint Eastwood. Not talent alone, though he has that in abundance. Not luck, though luck certainly played its part. The secret is the willingness to see opportunity where others see disaster. to move forward when everyone else steps back, to trust yourself when the whole world is telling you you're wrong. In a conference room full of crossed-out names, Clint Eastwood became a legend. Not because he was the first choice, or the second, or even the 10th, but because he was the one who said yes. If this story inspired you, if it reminded you that rejected opportunities can become life-changing victories, I want to hear about it. Hit that like button if you felt the tension in that Warner Brothers conference room. Subscribe if you want more untold Hollywood stories that reveal the truth behind the legends. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being the last choice doesn't mean being the wrong choice. And comment below, what opportunity has everyone else told you to walk away from? What role are you still fighting for? Your story matters, and the world needs to hear it. Until next time, remember, legends aren't born from playing it safe. They're born from saying yes when everyone else says no. Do you feel lucky? Well, do you?